The transport ship Voidclaw cut through space like a dagger through silk, its hull bristling with weapons that could level cities. Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed behind his back as he watched the blue-green world grow larger through the viewport. Earth, the third planet in this unremarkable system that had somehow managed to destroy 3 Dominion fleets. Still can't believe it, muttered Sub-Commander Crix from behind him. Those soft things actually fought back. Zethkar's tail twitched with irritation. The reports from the failed invasion attempts read like fiction, ships destroyed by crude projectile weapons. Elite Dominion troops overwhelmed by masses of primitive humans using chemical explosives and metal bullets. It was impossible, yet here they were, approaching what the galaxy now whispered about in fear, the world that had made the mighty Dominion retreat. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel," the communications officer announced. On screen, a human face appeared on the main display, male, middle-aged, wearing what appeared to be a simple uniform. No visible weapons or armor. No bio-enhancements. Just soft pink skin and intelligent brown eyes. "I am Admiral James Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force," the human said calmly. "You are entering Earth space without permission. State your intentions." Zethkar stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the bridge. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Dominion Military Council. I come under the flag of Parley to discuss terms." The human studied him for a moment. "Terms for what?" "Your surrender." Admiral Morrison's expression didn't change. "I see." "Well, Commander, you're welcome to come aboard our station to discuss whatever terms you'd like. We guarantee your safety under the rules of diplomatic immunity." The screen went dark. Zethkar's officers exchanged glances. In their experience, primitive species usually responded to Dominion contact with either terror or desperate aggression. This calm acceptance was unusual. 2 hours later, Zethkar found himself in a shuttle approaching what humans called Deep Space Station Alpha. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, bristling with defensive platforms and docking bays. His tactical mind automatically began cataloging weaknesses, but he found surprisingly few. The station's design was efficient, with overlapping fields of fire and redundant systems that spoke of serious military engineering. The docking bay they entered was spotlessly clean and filled with human personnel going about their duties with quiet efficiency. No one seemed particularly interested in the alien vessel that had just arrived. This lack of curiosity bothered Zethkar more than outright hostility would have. A small group of humans waited as he disembarked. Leading them was Admiral Morrison, now wearing a dress uniform that seemed designed more for ceremony than protection. Behind him stood what appeared to be a mixture of military officers and civilians, including the female he would soon come to know as Dr. Sarah Chen, Earth's foremost expert on xenobiology and warfare psychology. "Welcome to our station, Commander," Admiral Morrison said with a slight bow. "I hope your journey was comfortable." Zethkar towered over the humans, his bio-enhanced frame designed to intimidate. His species had conquered dozens of worlds simply by appearing in front of enemy leaders. The psychological impact of facing a 7-foot-tall predator with razor claws and natural armor usually ended conflicts before they began. Admiral Morrison looked up at him with mild interest, as if he were examining an unusual but not particularly threatening specimen. "You seem remarkably calm for someone whose world faces invasion," Zethkar observed. "Do we?" Morrison asked. "I hadn't noticed. Please, follow me. We have much to discuss." They walked through corridors lined with displays showing various human activities. Zethkar noticed images of humans working together on massive construction projects, children learning in educational facilities, and scientists conducting experiments. But mixed among these peaceful scenes were other images that made his blood run cold. Humans in military gear moving through destroyed cities. Massive explosions that dwarfed anything in the Dominion arsenal. Soldiers carrying weapons that seemed designed by madmen rather than engineers. And everywhere, the faces of humans engaged in combat showed not the desperate fear he expected from a primitive species, but cold, calculating determination. "These images," he said, pausing before a display showing what appeared to be a nuclear explosion. "This is your world?" "Part of our history," Dr. Chen said, speaking for the first time. She was small even by human standards, with graying hair and soft features. "We've been fighting wars for about as long as we've existed as a species." "Fighting each other," Morrison added. "For thousands of years. Territory, resources, ideologies, religions, simple tribal hatred. We've gotten quite good at it." They entered a conference room where refreshments had been prepared. The humans sat casually around a large table, their body language relaxed and non-threatening. Zethkar remained standing, his natural instincts telling him that showing any sign of being at ease would be perceived as weakness. "So," Morrison said, pouring himself what appeared to be a caffeinated beverage, "you mentioned surrender terms. I'm curious what you have in mind." Zethkar had given this speech hundreds of times to dozens of species. The words came automatically. "The Dominion offers your species incorporation into our empire. You will maintain local autonomy over your world while providing tribute and military service to the greater good of galactic civilization. Your technological and biological distinctiveness will be preserved and utilized for the benefit of all Dominion worlds." "I see," Morrison said, taking a sip of his drink. "And if we refuse, then your world will be pacified by force. Your population will be relocated to more suitable worlds where they can be properly integrated into Dominion society. Your planet's resources will be utilized more efficiently than your current primitive methods allow." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "Commander, may I ask about your military background? You've clearly seen significant combat." The question caught Zethkar off guard. Most species wanted to know about Dominion technology or the size of their fleets. "I have conquered 17 worlds in the name of the Dominion. I have never known defeat." "Impressive," she said. "Tell me, in your experience, what makes for effective military leadership?" Another unexpected question. "Superior firepower, adequate logistics, the ability to project force across interstellar distances, disciplined troops who follow orders without question." "Doctor," Chen nodded thoughtfully, "those are certainly important factors. We humans have some additional perspectives on warfare that you might find interesting." She gestured to one of the wall displays, which showed what appeared to be an ancient human battlefield. Thousands of warriors in primitive armor clashed with spears and swords while archers rained arrows from strategic positions. "This is from about 2,500 years ago," she explained. "The Battle of Thermopylae. 300 Spartan warriors held off an army of over 100,000 Persians for 3 days. Zethkar studied the image with professional interest. Superior defensive position. Narrow pass that negated enemy numerical advantage. Standard tactics. "Yes, but that's not the interesting part," Morrison said. "The interesting part is that those 300 warriors knew they were going to die. They went into battle with absolute certainty that they would not survive, and they fought anyway." "Fanaticism," Zethkar said dismissively. "Religious or cultural conditioning. The Dominion has encountered such behavior before. It can be effective in limited tactical situations but ultimately fails against superior technology and numbers." Dr. Chen smiled that same unsettling smile he had seen in the transmission earlier. "Commander, may I share something with you? A story that might illustrate a different perspective on human military thinking." Zethkar gestured for her to continue, though his patience with human philosophical discussions was wearing thin. "During one of our global conflicts, we call it World War II, there was a battle for a Pacific island called Iwo Jima. The Japanese defenders had turned the island into a fortress with underground tunnels, hidden gun positions, and carefully planned killing fields. They had about 20,000 troops. We attacked with over 70,000 Marines. The display showed images of human soldiers advancing across volcanic ash while explosions erupted around them. The defenders were invisible, hidden in caves and tunnels, picking off attackers with surgical precision. The Japanese fought brilliantly," Dr. Chen continued. "They used every advantage the terrain offered. They had superior positions, interior lines, and the benefit of months of preparation. By every conventional military analysis, they should have held that island indefinitely against a seaborne assault. Yet you took it," Zethkar said. "Superior numbers eventually prevailed." "We took it," Morrison agreed, "but not because of superior numbers. We took it because of something the Japanese hadn't counted on, something that most species in the galaxy don't seem to understand about humans." The display changed to show human soldiers advancing through artillery bombardments, climbing over rocks while under fire, charging directly into machine gun nests with nothing but rifles and grenades. "We kept coming," Dr. Chen said simply. "No matter how many of us died, no matter how hopeless it seemed, we kept coming. We took casualties that would have broken most armies, losses that should have forced any rational commander to retreat, and we kept coming." Zethkar studied the images more carefully. The human faces he saw weren't filled with the mindless rage he associated with berserker species or the cold detachment of enhanced soldiers. They showed fear, pain, exhaustion, and something else. Something that made his enhanced combat instincts send warning signals throughout his nervous system. They showed determination. Not the simple stubbornness of a species too stupid to know when they were beaten, but the calculated resolve of individuals who understood exactly what they were facing and had decided to face it anyway. 36 days, Morrison said quietly. That's how long it took us to secure that island. We lost over 6,000 Marines. The Japanese lost almost their entire garrison, but we kept coming, and eventually, we won. Dr. Chen pulled up another display. That's just one example, Commander. We have thousands of similar battles throughout our history. Humans have been practicing warfare against the most dangerous opponents in the galaxy for millennia. What opponents? Zethkar asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Other humans, she said. We've spent thousands of years learning how to fight creatures exactly as intelligent, innovative, and determined as ourselves. Every military tactic you can imagine we've not only encountered but perfected. Every psychological warfare technique, every technological innovation, every strategic deception, we've used them all against opponents who were just as capable of using them against us. The conference room fell silent. Zethkar found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about this species. The Dominion's previous military encounters had been against species that were either technologically inferior or psychologically unprepared for total war. Most civilizations had evolved past the need for large-scale conflict before achieving interstellar travel. Humans, apparently, had achieved interstellar travel without evolving past anything. You're trying to intimidate me with stories of primitive conflicts, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The Dominion has energy weapons, starships, orbital bombardment capabilities. Your historical battles are irrelevant. Admiral Morrison leaned back in his chair. Commander, let me share something with you about human military doctrine. We have a saying, the enemy gets a vote. No matter how perfect your plan, no matter how overwhelming your advantages, your opponent will do something unexpected. They'll adapt, they'll find your weaknesses, they'll force you to fight the battle they want to fight instead of the one you planned. Dr. Chen nodded. That's why we study every form of conflict, from individual combat to global warfare. We've learned that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the biggest guns or the most ships. It's the one who's willing to do whatever it takes to win, who can adapt faster than you can plan, and who refuses to accept defeat even when defeat seems certain. She gestured to another display showing modern human military exercises. Soldiers moved with practiced efficiency through urban environments, coordinating air support with ground operations, while civilians went about their daily lives only blocks away. We've been fighting wars in our cities, Commander, for generations. We know how to conduct military operations while protecting non-combatants, how to maintain supply lines through hostile territory, how to coordinate between different branches of service with completely different capabilities and doctrines. Morrison stood and walked to a window overlooking the docking bay where Zethkar's shuttle sat surrounded by human maintenance crews. The Dominion has been very successful conquering species that either couldn't fight back effectively or weren't willing to pay the price that victory requires. We're not either of those species. Zethkar followed his gaze and noticed something that sent another chill through his enhanced nervous system. The maintenance crews working on his shuttle weren't just performing routine servicing, they were studying it, taking detailed scans, examining every system, learning everything they could about Dominion technology. And they were doing it right in front of him, with no attempt at concealment. You're analyzing my ship, he said. Of course we are, Doctor, Chen replied. We've been analyzing every piece of Dominion technology we've encountered since your first fleet arrived. We've reverse-engineered your weapons, studied your tactics, identified your supply lines and communication protocols. Did you think we were just going to sit here and wait for you to come back? The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. While the Dominion leadership had been debating their next move, assuming that the primitive humans would remain static and defensive, the humans had been actively preparing, learning, adapting, getting ready to fight a war they intended to win. Morrison returned to his seat. Commander, I'm going to make you an offer. Stay with us for a few days. Let us show you some things about human military capability that might change your perspective on this conflict. Learn what we've learned about warfare over the past few thousand years, and if I don't like what I see, then you're free to return to your fleet and report whatever you choose, Morrison said. We're confident enough in our position that we're willing to let you see exactly what you're up against. Zethkar stood silently for several minutes, his tactical mind racing through possibilities. This could be an elaborate trap, but his instincts suggested otherwise. These humans seemed genuinely interested in showing him something, and their confidence was either masterful psychological warfare or based on capabilities he didn't yet understand. Either way, he needed to know more. I accept your offer, he said finally. Dr. Chen's smile returned. And for the first time, Zethkar understood why it bothered him so much. It wasn't the smile of someone trying to be friendly or diplomatic. It was the smile of a predator that had just convinced its prey to follow it into the darkness. The humans were about to show him truths about warfare that would change everything he thought he knew about combat, strategy, and what it meant to fight for survival against an opponent that refused to lose. And deep in his enhanced combat consciousness, something that had kept him alive through 17 planetary conquests, began screaming warnings he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The next morning, Zethkar was escorted to what the humans called their combat training center. He expected to see primitive physical conditioning exercises or basic weapons training. Instead, he found himself standing in an observation deck overlooking a complex that seemed to stretch for kilometers in every direction. "This is where we test new military technologies and train our special operations personnel," explained Colonel Martinez, the human who had been assigned as his guide. She was younger than Admiral Morrison, with the lean build and alert eyes that Zethkar recognized in professional soldiers across the galaxy. Below them, human soldiers were engaged in what appeared to be a complex urban warfare simulation. The environment had been constructed to resemble a typical Dominion colony city, complete with energy shields, automated defense turrets, and patrol patterns that matched standard Dominion military doctrine. "How did you acquire detailed intelligence on our defensive systems?" Zethkar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Same way we acquire intelligence on any potential enemy," Colonel Martinez replied. "We studied every engagement, analyzed every piece of debris from your ships, interviewed survivors from worlds you've conquered. We also had some help from species you've subjugated, who weren't entirely happy with their new circumstances." The observation deck speakers crackled to life, broadcasting the communications between the human soldiers below. Zethkar listened with growing amazement as the team coordinated a complex assault that demonstrated intimate knowledge of Dominion tactics, equipment, and psychological profiles. Team Alpha, the Dominion defenders will concentrate their heaviest weapons on the main approach. They always do. Their doctrine prioritizes overwhelming firepower over tactical flexibility. Copy that. Beta Team, use the sewer access. Dominion species generally have enhanced senses of smell, so they avoid underground approaches. Gamma Team, remember that Dominion soldiers are bio-enhanced for direct combat, but their armor has weak points at the joints. Target there first. The assault unfolded with surgical precision. The humans used every weakness in Dominion doctrine, exploited every gap in their typical defensive arrangements, and demonstrated countermeasures for weapons and tactics that the Dominion considered their greatest advantages. "This is impossible," Zethkar muttered. "You've never fought Dominion forces in urban combat?" Colonel Martinez smiled. "Commander, we've been fighting urban combat for centuries. The opponents change, but the principles remain the same. Hide among the civilian population. Use the terrain to negate enemy advantages. Force the enemy to fight the battle you want to fight, not the one they planned." She gestured toward another section of the training facility, where a different exercise was taking place. Human soldiers were practicing what appeared to be insurgency tactics, sabotaging supply lines, conducting hit-and-run attacks, and disappearing into civilian populations. "Your species conquers worlds by establishing orbital superiority and then landing overwhelming ground forces," she continued. "That works against species that fight conventional battles." But what happens when your enemy doesn't meet you in conventional battle? On the display screens around the observation deck, scenarios played out showing human resistance movements operating under Dominion occupation, supply convoys destroyed by improvised explosives, communication networks disrupted by cyber attacks, Dominion personnel targeted by snipers who melted back into civilian populations before reinforcements could arrive. "Every human who has ever lived has grown up learning about resistance movements," Colonel Martinez explained. "We have detailed historical records of how to fight occupying forces, how to survive under totalitarian regimes, how to maintain morale and organization when facing overwhelming odds." Zethkar watched human soldiers practice techniques that seemed designed specifically to counter Dominion advantages. They moved in small groups, communicated through secure channels, and used weapons that were cheap to manufacture and easy to conceal. Most disturbing of all, they showed no hesitation about operating in areas where their actions might result in civilian casualties. "You would sacrifice your own people," he observed. "We would do whatever it takes to win," Colonel Martinez corrected. "That's something most species in the galaxy don't understand about humans. We don't fight wars to minimize casualties or follow genteel rules of engagement. We fight wars to win them." She led him to another section where humans were practicing what they called asymmetric warfare, The scenarios involved small human forces engaging much larger Dominion units, using tactics that seemed to come from madmen rather than military strategists. This exercise simulates what we call fourth-generation warfare, she explained as they watched human soldiers coordinate attacks using improvised explosives, cyber warfare, and psychological operations. The goal isn't to defeat the enemy in direct battle. The goal is to make occupation so costly and destructive that the enemy decides it's not worth continuing. The humans demonstrated techniques for turning Dominion advantages against themselves. They showed how to bait Dominion forces into using their most powerful weapons in areas where civilian casualties would damage their political objectives. They practiced ways to manipulate Dominion communication networks to spread disinformation and coordinate resistance activities. Most disturbingly, they rehearsed scenarios where human forces would deliberately sacrifice themselves to achieve tactical objectives, with backup teams ready to exploit the chaos that resulted. "This is not warfare," Zethkar said. "This is terrorism." Colonel Martinez turned to face him directly. "Commander, let me explain something about human military philosophy. We don't make distinctions between honorable and dishonorable ways of fighting. There are only effective ways and ineffective ways. If terrorism works, we use terrorism. If genocide works, we use genocide. If sacrificing entire cities saves our species, we sacrifice entire cities." She pulled up historical records on the display screens, images of human cities destroyed by their own forces to deny them to enemies, bridges blown up with friendly troops still on them to prevent enemy advances, entire regions scorched with fire and poison to create barriers that enemy forces couldn't cross. "We call it total war," she said. "The idea that when your survival is at stake, everything becomes a legitimate target and every tactic becomes acceptable. We learned it fighting each other, and we've gotten very, very good at it." The scenarios playing out on the screens showed human forces implementing strategies that made Zethkar's enhanced combat instincts recoil in horror. They practiced destroying their own infrastructure to deny it to occupying forces. They rehearsed mass population relocations that would leave Dominion troops controlling empty cities, while the human population melted away to continue fighting from hidden bases. Most disturbing of all, they demonstrated plans for what they called scorched earth resistance that would render entire continents uninhabitable rather than allow them to fall under Dominion control. You would destroy your own world rather than surrender it, Zethkar said, and it wasn't a question. Without hesitation, Colonel Martinez confirmed, "Commander, your species has been successful because you've been fighting civilized opponents, species that value their own lives, their infrastructure, their cultural achievements, species that can be convinced to surrender when the cost of resistance becomes too high." She gestured toward the training exercises where human soldiers were practicing urban warfare in simulated ruins of their own cities. "We've already calculated what full-scale resistance would cost us. Approximately 60% casualties in the first year. Complete destruction of our current civilization, decades of guerrilla warfare with no guarantee of victory. And you're willing to accept those costs? We're willing to accept whatever costs are necessary. That's what you're not understanding, Commander. This isn't just another conquest for us. This is our survival as a free species. And humans have never been very good at accepting slavery, no matter how benevolent the masters claim to be." Colonel Martinez led him to a final observation area, where the most disturbing exercise of all was taking place. Human forces were practicing what they called deep strike operations, long-range missions designed to target Dominion homeworlds and supply bases. "You're planning to attack us," Zethkar realized. "We're planning to win," she corrected. "You want to turn this into a war of occupation and resistance. We want to turn it into a war where your people experience the same fear and destruction that you've brought to dozens of other worlds." The human soldiers below were rehearsing scenarios involving infiltration of Dominion space, sabotage of critical infrastructure, and targeted strikes against Dominion leadership. They practiced using captured Dominion technology, learned to mimic Dominion communication protocols, and demonstrated techniques for surviving in hostile alien environments. These operations would be suicide missions, Zethkar observed. "Some of them," Colonel Martinez agreed. "But humans have never had trouble finding volunteers for suicide missions when the cause is important enough. And every mission that succeeds brings us intelligence, damages your capabilities, and forces you to divert resources from offensive operations to defensive ones." She showed him recordings of human military leaders discussing strategies that assumed massive human casualties while inflicting disproportionate damage on Dominion forces and infrastructure. Your entire military doctrine is based on convincing enemies that resistance is futile, she continued. You use overwhelming force to break enemy morale, then offer terms that allow them to survive under Dominion rule. It's elegant, efficient, and has worked beautifully against species that want to survive more than they want to remain free. The training exercises concluded with a scenario that left Zethkar speechless. Human forces simulated a coordinated attack on a Dominion fleet using nothing but modified civilian spacecraft, improvised weapons, and tactics that amounted to organized suicide attacks. The simulation showed dozens of human vessels ramming Dominion warships while broadcasting messages of defiance. Even when the Dominion forces achieved overwhelming tactical victory, the human attacks continued with survivors using escape pods as delivery systems for improvised explosives. This is madness, Zethkar said. This is humanity, Colonel Martinez replied. Commander, you've spent your career fighting species that valued their lives above their freedom. You've never faced an enemy that considered death preferable to subjugation. She led him away from the training areas toward what appeared to be a research facility. There's something else we need to show you, she said. Something about human technological adaptation that your intelligence services might have missed. The research facility buzzed with activity as human scientists worked on projects that seemed designed specifically to counter Dominion advantages. Zethkar saw weapons being developed that used principles he didn't recognize, defensive systems that incorporated captured Dominion technology in ways that shouldn't have been possible, and spacecraft designs that seemed to ignore several fundamental laws of physics. How long have you been preparing for this war? He asked. Since your first scout ships entered our system 3 years ago, Dr. Sarah Chen said, approaching them from one of the laboratory areas. The moment we detected artificial gravity signatures and faster-than-light propulsion, we knew we weren't alone in the galaxy. The moment your first fleet arrived and demanded our surrender, we knew what kind of neighbors we had. She led them through laboratories where human researchers were dissecting Dominion technology with the focused intensity that Zethkar associated with military engineers preparing for battle. We've reverse-engineered your energy weapons, she continued. We've developed countermeasures for your armor and shielding systems. We've learned to manufacture your faster-than-light drives and integrated them into our own spacecraft designs. One laboratory contained what appeared to be a hybrid spacecraft that combined human engineering with Dominion technology in ways that violated everything Zethkar knew about xenotechnology integration. That's impossible, he said. Dominion technology uses quantum field matrices that are incompatible with primitive electromagnetic systems. Apparently not, Dr. Chen replied with that unsettling smile. We found several ways to make them work together. Turns out that when your survival depends on solving impossible technical problems, humans become very creative about ignoring things that are supposed to be impossible. The tour continued through laboratories working on projects that demonstrated capabilities Zethkar hadn't known the humans possessed. Advanced metallurgy that produced armor superior to standard Dominion materials. Energy weapons that used principles derived from captured Dominion technology but implemented in ways that were somehow more efficient than the originals. Most disturbing were the biological research facilities where human scientists were working on what they called enhancement programs. We've been studying your bioenhancements, Dr. Chen explained as they observed humans undergoing procedures that seemed designed to match Dominion physical capabilities. Increased strength, faster reflexes, enhanced sensory capabilities. We're not quite as advanced as your species, but we're catching up quickly. Bioenhancement takes generations to implement safely, Zethkar protested. For species that prioritize safety over effectiveness, she agreed. We've accelerated the timeline considerably by accepting higher risk levels. When you're facing extinction, acceptable risk calculations change dramatically. The enhanced humans he observed moved with capabilities that approached Dominion standards. They weren't quite as strong or fast as his species, but they were close enough to eliminate the vast physical advantages that Dominion forces had relied on in previous conquests. Combined with our existing advantages in tactical flexibility and technological adaptation, Dr. Chen continued, we calculate that enhanced human forces would be roughly equivalent to standard Dominion troops in most combat scenarios. But you have additional advantages that we're particularly excited about, Colonel Martinez added. Enhanced humans retain all the psychological and cultural characteristics that make baseline humans so dangerous in warfare. The creativity, the adaptability, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. She showed him training records of enhanced humans practicing combat techniques that combined Dominion physical capabilities with human tactical innovations. The results were disturbing. Warriors who moved like Dominion soldiers but fought like humans. We estimate that we can have the first enhanced divisions operational within 6 months, she said. Full-scale production of enhanced troops within 2 years. Dr. Chen pulled up additional research projects that demonstrated human progress in areas Zethkar had assumed were far beyond their capabilities. We're also working on what we call next-generation enhancements, she said. Capabilities that exceed standard Dominion specifications. Enhanced humans who are stronger, faster, and more resilient than anything your species has developed. That's theoretically impossible, Zethkar said. There are biological limits that cannot be exceeded. According to Dominion science, perhaps, Dr. Bing said. Chen replied. But human science has a tendency to find ways around theoretical limitations when the alternatives involve extinction. The day concluded with a demonstration that left Zethkar questioning everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. Enhanced human soldiers engaged in combat exercises that showcased not just physical improvements, but tactical innovations that incorporated lessons learned from thousands of years of human warfare. They moved like Dominion troops, but fought like humans, combining overwhelming physical capabilities with the unpredictable creativity and ruthless pragmatism that had made baseline humanity so dangerous. Commander, Admiral Morrison said as they returned to the conference room. I hope today has given you a better understanding of what your people are proposing to fight. Zethkar stood silently, his enhanced mind processing implications that sent cascades of alarm through his consciousness. The humans weren't just preparing to resist Dominion conquest, they were preparing to match Dominion capabilities while retaining all the psychological and cultural advantages that made them formidable opponents. What do you want from me? He asked finally. We want you to understand what this war will cost, Morrison replied. Not just what it will cost humanity, but what it will cost the Dominion. Because once this conflict begins, it won't end until one of our species is extinct. The weight of that statement settled over Zethkar like a physical presence. For the first time since beginning his military career, he found himself facing an enemy that might actually be more dangerous than his own people. And tomorrow, they were going to show him things that would make today's revelations seem like gentle warnings. The third day began with what Admiral Morrison called a historical perspective on human strategic thinking. Zethkar was escorted to a massive chamber, lined with displays showing battles from across human history. But these weren't the primitive conflicts he had seen before. These were strategic analyses that demonstrated patterns of thinking that made his enhanced tactical consciousness recognize something profoundly disturbing. Commander, Dr. Chen said as they entered the chamber. Yesterday, we showed you how we prepare for war. Today, we want to show you how we think about war. The central display activated, showing the three-dimensional representation of what appeared to be an ancient human conflict. Thousands of warriors moved across a continental landscape in patterns that seemed random until Zethkar began to recognize the underlying strategic logic. This is the Mongol conquest of Eurasia, approximately 800 years ago. Doctor, Chen explained, one human culture conquered the largest contiguous land empire in your planet's history, using principles that we still study today. The display showed Mongol forces engaging enemies across multiple theaters simultaneously, coordinating operations across distances that should have been impossible with primitive communication technology. The Mongols understood something about warfare that most galactic civilizations seem to miss, she continued. Victory doesn't come from having the best technology or the strongest warriors. Victory comes from being able to fight the kind of war your enemy can't handle. Zethkar watched as the simulation showed Mongol forces avoiding direct confrontation with heavily armored European knights, instead using mobility and psychological warfare to destroy enemy morale before conventional battles began. They faced opponents with superior armor, better fortifications, and more advanced military engineering, Morrison added. But they won because they refused to fight the battles their enemies wanted to fight. The strategic implications were obvious and terrifying. The Mongols had faced the same challenge humanity now faced, confronting technologically superior opponents with overwhelming resource advantages. You're applying ancient human strategies to interstellar warfare, Zethkar realized. We're applying eternal human principles to our current situation, Dr. Wolfstein, Chen corrected. The technology changes, but the fundamental logic of conflict remains constant. She activated another display, showing what appeared to be a more recent human conflict. World War II Pacific Theater, she said. The Japanese Empire controlled most of the Western Pacific Ocean. They had experienced troops, advanced naval technology, and defensive positions that should have been impregnable. The display showed Japanese forces entrenched on hundreds of islands, each one transformed into a fortress that could hold off vastly superior attacking forces. The Americans faced the same problem the Mongols had faced: how to defeat an enemy that was better prepared for conventional warfare, Morrison explained. So they developed a strategy that bypassed enemy strengths entirely. The simulation showed American forces systematically bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions, instead attacking lightly defended targets that were crucial to Japanese strategic logistics. Island hopping, Dr. Chen said. Instead of attacking every Japanese fortress, they attacked only the ones they needed to control sea lanes and supply routes. Japanese garrisons were left isolated and helpless while American forces advanced toward the Japanese home islands. Zethkar studied the strategic patterns with growing unease. The Americans had faced opponents who controlled superior defensive positions across an enormous theater of operations. Instead of attempting costly direct assaults, they had identified the minimal number of targets necessary to achieve strategic victory. "You're going to do the same thing to the Dominion," he said. "We're going to do exactly the same thing to the Dominion," Morrison confirmed. "Your empire controls hundreds of worlds, but you don't control all of them equally. Some are critical to your industrial capacity. Some control strategic resources. Some are necessary for communication and logistics." The display changed to show a three-dimensional map of Dominion space with human analysis overlaid in red symbols.
"We've spent 3 years studying your empire's structure, Dr. Terson,"
Chen continued. "We know which worlds produce your advanced technology. We know which systems control your faster-than-light communication networks. We know where your military academies train your officer corps and where your research facilities develop new weapons." The analysis was comprehensive and accurate in ways that should have been impossible for a species that had never traveled beyond their own solar system. Zethkar could see critical vulnerabilities in Dominion's strategic infrastructure that his own military planners had never considered. "This intelligence is classified at levels that even most Dominion citizens cannot access," he protested. "Commander, we've been intercepting Dominion communications for 3 years," Morrison replied. "We've also had extensive cooperation from species you've conquered, who maintain detailed records of Dominion administrative procedures." The implications hit Zethkar like a series of physical blows. While the Dominion had been treating humans as an isolated problem on a single world, the humans had been conducting intelligence operations across the entire Dominion Empire. "You've been preparing for a galactic war while we thought we were dealing with primitive rebels," he said. "We've been preparing for the only kind of war that makes sense from our strategic position, Doctor," Chen replied. "We can't match your industrial capacity or your total military strength. But we don't need to match them. We just need to identify the critical points where targeted attacks will cause disproportionate damage to your operational capabilities." She activated a series of strategic analyses that demonstrated human thinking about interstellar warfare in ways that made Zethkar's combat instincts scream warnings. The humans had identified Dominion worlds whose destruction would disrupt faster-than-light communication across entire sectors. They had located industrial facilities whose elimination would create cascading shortages of critical military equipment. They had even mapped the educational and research institutions that trained Dominion leadership. "This isn't warfare," Zethkar said. "This is the systematic destruction of an entire civilization. This is exactly what the Mongols did to the Khwarezmid Empire." Morrison replied calmly. "What the Americans did to Imperial Japan. What humans have always done when facing opponents who threaten our survival." Doctor Chen pulled up historical records, showing the results of human strategic campaigns. "The Khwarezmid Empire was one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth when the Mongols attacked," she explained. "They had superior technology, larger armies, better fortifications. But the Mongols systematically destroyed their infrastructure, eliminated their leadership, and scattered their population until nothing remained but ruins. The comparison was obvious and horrifying. The humans weren't planning to fight a war with the Dominion. They were planning to destroy the Dominion as a political and cultural entity. You can't possibly have the military capability to attack targets across our entire empire," Zethkar protested. "We don't need to attack targets across your entire empire," Morrison replied. "We just need to attack the right targets in the right sequence to create cascading failures in your strategic capabilities." The display showed detailed analyses of Dominion logistics networks, communication systems, and industrial dependencies. The humans had identified choke points where relatively small attacks could disrupt operations across vast regions of space. For example, Dr. Rapato, Chen said, highlighting a particular system on the strategic map, The Vorthan industrial complex produces approximately 40% of all advanced combat electronics used by Dominion military forces. It's defended by a single battle fleet and depends on resource shipments from 6 different systems. The analysis showed how coordinated attacks on the resource systems would force the industrial complex to shut down, while simultaneous strikes against the defending fleet would prevent reinforcement of other Dominion positions. Eliminate those 7 targets, Morrison continued, and you cripple Dominion military production for the entire Gamma sector, which forces you to redeploy fleets from other sectors, which creates vulnerabilities we can exploit elsewhere. Zethkar studied the strategic analysis, with the growing realization that the humans had developed a comprehensive plan for dismantling Dominion civilization piece by piece. This would require coordination across interstellar distances with primitive communication technology, he said, grasping for flaws in their planning. Actually, it wouldn't, Doctor, Chen replied. That's another lesson we learned from human history. Successful strategic campaigns don't require centralized command and control. They require clear objectives and autonomous units, capable of adapting to changing circumstances. She showed him analyses of what the humans called cell-based resistance networks that could operate independently across vast distances while maintaining strategic coordination. Each human strike force will have complete intelligence on Dominion targets in their assigned sector, she explained. They'll know which targets are critical, which are secondary, and which can be ignored. They'll be able to adapt their operations based on local conditions without requiring communication with Central Command. The strategic implications were staggering. The humans were planning to conduct simultaneous operations across hundreds of star systems using independent forces that could coordinate their activities through shared strategic understanding rather than direct communication. Even if you succeed in disrupting our industrial capacity, Zethkar said, the Dominion still has thousands of warships and millions of troops. You cannot defeat our military forces in direct combat. We don't plan to defeat your military forces in direct combat, Morrison replied. We plan to make your military forces irrelevant. He activated a display showing what appeared to be a simulation of Dominion fleet operations under attack from human forces. Your warships are designed for conventional space combat against opponents who fight by the same rules you do, he continued. They're optimized for engaging enemy fleets in open space using energy weapons and defensive systems. The simulation showed human forces avoiding direct fleet engagement entirely, instead using what they called asymmetric space warfare tactics. Our ships are smaller, faster, and designed for hit-and-run operations, Dr. Chen explained as the simulation showed human vessels conducting raids against Dominion logistics convoys and industrial facilities. We don't try to match your firepower. We try to attack targets you can't adequately defend. The human strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of engaging Dominion battle fleets, they would attack the supply lines, communication networks, and industrial facilities that made those fleets operationally effective. Your battle fleets become useless when they don't have fuel, ammunition, or replacement parts, Morrison observed, and they become strategically irrelevant when there's nothing left for them to defend. Zethkar watched the simulation with growing horror as human forces systematically dismantled Dominion strategic capabilities while avoiding direct confrontation with Dominion military strength. This strategy assumes that human forces can survive long enough to conduct these operations, he said. Our retaliatory capabilities would destroy your world within days of the first attack. Which brings us to our final strategic consideration. Dr. Chen said with that unsettling smile that had haunted Zethkar since their first meeting. The display changed to show what appeared to be a comprehensive evacuation plan involving the entire human population. Commander, you're still thinking like a conventional military strategist, she continued. You assume that human civilization is tied to Earth, that destroying our home world would end our capacity for resistance. The evacuation plans showed human populations being dispersed across hundreds of hidden facilities throughout their solar system and beyond. Industrial capacity relocated to asteroid mining operations and deep space manufacturing platforms. Military commands established in locations that would be almost impossible for Dominion forces to detect or attack. We've been preparing for the possibility that Earth might be destroyed in the opening phases of this conflict, Morrison explained. If that happens, it will be tragic, but it won't end the war.
You would sacrifice your homeworld? We would sacrifice anything necessary to ensure that humanity survives as a free species. Dr.
Chen replied, including our homeworld, our current civilization, and any number of individual human lives. The strategic analyses showed human civilization transforming itself into something that could survive and fight effectively even after losing its original home. mobile populations, distributed industrial capacity, and military forces designed to operate independently across interstellar distances. This is what total war means when practiced by humans, Morrison said. Everything becomes subordinate to the goal of victory. Every resource, every person, every moral consideration becomes a tool to be used or sacrificed as strategy requires. Zethkar found himself facing strategic thinking that operated on levels his own military education had never prepared him for. The humans weren't just planning to fight a war. They were planning to transform their entire civilization into a weapon designed for the specific purpose of destroying the Dominion. "You're planning to commit genocide," he said. "We're planning to survive," Dr. Chen corrected. "The Dominion has given us a choice between extinction and resistance. We've chosen resistance, and we're prepared to pursue that choice to its logical conclusion." She activated a final display that showed the projected outcome of the strategic campaign the humans had planned. "Conservative estimates suggest that full implementation of our war plan would result in the collapse of Dominion civilization within 20 to 30 years, she said. "Optimistic estimates suggest it could happen much faster if we're able to coordinate our operations effectively." The analysis was thorough, calculating not just military objectives, but the broader social and economic disruptions that would result from the systematic destruction of Dominion infrastructure.
Your species would survive, Morrison added, but your empire would not.
The scattered populations on Dominion worlds would revert to local governments, probably at pre-industrial technological levels. "And if we win?" Zethkar asked. "If Dominion forces succeed in conquering Earth and eliminating human resistance, then you'll spend the next several centuries hunting human survivors across the galaxy," Dr. Chen replied. "Because we've already established fallback positions that your intelligence services don't know about, and we've made contact with other species who have reasons to oppose Dominion expansion." The implications of that statement sent new waves of alarm through Zethkar's consciousness. The humans hadn't just been preparing for war with the Dominion, they had been organizing a galactic resistance movement. "How many species?" he asked. "Enough," Morrison replied. "The Dominion has made a lot of enemies over the centuries, Commander, species that were conquered and never fully integrated. Species that were never contacted but know that conquest is inevitable if Dominion expansion continues. You've been building an alliance. We've been offering hope to species that thought resistance was impossible," Dr. Chen said, "demonstrating that the Dominion can be fought effectively, that your military advantages aren't insurmountable, that there are alternatives to submission or extinction." As the day concluded, Zethkar found himself contemplating strategic realities that challenged everything he had believed about Dominion superiority and human primitiveness. The soft-skinned species that had seemed so helpless were actually the most dangerous enemy his people had ever faced. And tomorrow, they were going to show him the weapons and tactics that would turn their strategic plans into battlefield realities. The fourth day began in the deepest levels of the human station, in facilities that existed behind security measures that rivaled anything Zethkar had seen in Dominion black sites. Admiral Morrison and Dr. Chen escorted him through corridors lined with warnings in multiple human languages and symbols that needed no translation. "Today we show you the tools," Morrison said simply. The first chamber they entered contained what appeared to be a small human spacecraft, but as Zethkar examined it more closely, he realized that every system had been designed according to principles that violated fundamental assumptions about space combat. "We call it a ghost ship," Dr. Chen explained. "It's designed to be completely invisible to Dominion sensor arrays using a combination of your own stealth technology and innovations we've developed specifically to counter your detection methods." The vessel was smaller than a Dominion fighter craft, but packed with systems that demonstrated human engineering approaching theoretical limits, fusion reactors that produced no detectable emissions, propulsion systems that left no signature in subspace, weapon systems that fired projectiles designed to mimic natural cosmic debris. "This is impossible," Zethkar said, examining the technical specifications. "The power requirements alone should make this design unworkable." "Should, according to Dominion engineering principles," Dr. Chen agreed. "But human engineering has always specialized in making impossible things work when the stakes are high enough." She showed him through the ship's systems, each one representing breakthroughs that combined captured Dominion technology with human innovations in ways that exceeded the capabilities of either approach alone. "The fusion reactor uses principles we learned from your power systems, but implements them using human materials science that allows much higher efficiency," she explained. "The stealth systems incorporate your sensor dampening technology, but supplement it with metamaterials that shouldn't theoretically exist." "Where did you acquire metamaterials with these properties?" We made them, Dr. Chen replied with that unsettling smile. When you're facing extinction, you tend to find solutions to problems that seemed impossible during peacetime. The ghost ship's weapons systems were even more disturbing. Instead of energy weapons that could be detected and countered, it carried kinetic projectiles that used Dominion faster-than-light technology to appear directly inside enemy vessels. Conventional shields can't stop something that doesn't cross the shield boundary, Morrison explained as they examined the weapon systems. These projectiles use micro-scale FTL jumps to bypass defensive systems entirely. Zethkar studied the technical specifications with growing alarm. The weapons were designed to target specific ship systems, reactors, life support, command centers, with surgical precision that would disable vessels without destroying them completely. You're planning to capture Dominion ships, he realized. We're planning to capture everything we can, Dr. Chen confirmed. Ships, technology, personnel, intelligence. Every Dominion asset we acquire makes us stronger while making you weaker. They moved to another chamber containing larger spacecraft that represented even more disturbing innovations in human military technology. These vessels were designed for deep space operations in regions where no support would be available. Long-range strategic raiders, Morrison explained, designed to operate independently in Dominion space for periods of up to 5 years. They carry everything necessary to conduct extended operations, including manufacturing facilities, medical equipment, and even recreational systems for crew morale. The ships were marvels of compact engineering that somehow incorporated industrial capabilities into vessels no larger than Dominion destroyers. They could manufacture their own ammunition, conduct repairs using materials salvaged from captured enemy vessels, and even produce replacement crew members using genetic techniques that Zethkar didn't want to understand. Each raider carries a complete genetic database and artificial gestation systems. Dr. Chen explained, if casualties exceed replacement rates through normal crew rotation, they can literally grow new personnel. That's obscene, Zethkar protested. That's practical, she corrected. When you're conducting operations at interstellar distances with no hope of reinforcement, you need to be completely self-sufficient, including personnel replacement. The strategic implications were staggering. The humans were preparing to conduct military operations deep in Dominion space, using forces that could sustain themselves indefinitely without support from Earth. How many of these raiders do you have? He asked. Enough, Morrison replied, which Zethkar was beginning to recognize as a standard human response to questions about their military capabilities. The talk continued through chambers containing weapon systems that seemed designed by species with fundamentally different concepts of warfare. Zethkar saw devices that used biological agents engineered to target specific aspects of Dominion physiology. Weapons that manipulated gravity fields to crush enemy vessels from within. Systems that interfered with the quantum processes that made Dominion consciousness possible. This goes beyond warfare, he said, examining a device that appeared designed to disrupt the neural enhancement implants that most Dominion citizens used for communication and memory storage. You're developing weapons that attack the fundamental basis of our civilization. We're developing weapons that attack every advantage you have over us, Dr. Chen replied. Your physical enhancements, your technological integration, your faster-than-light communications, your industrial capacity. Everything that makes Dominion civilization superior to ours becomes a target for systematic elimination. She showed him biological weapons designed to target the specific genetic modifications that gave Dominion species their enhanced physical capabilities. The weapons wouldn't kill, but they would reduce enhanced Dominion warriors to baseline biological function. Imagine your troops suddenly losing their enhanced strength, speed, and sensors in the middle of combat, she said. Imagine your entire population losing the neural interfaces that allow instant communication and information access.
The psychological warfare implications were as disturbing as the physical ones.
Dominion society depended on technological integration that enhanced individual capabilities and enabled seamless coordination between individuals and groups. You're planning to make us primitives, Zethkar realized. We're planning to level the playing field, Morrison corrected. When both sides are reduced to baseline biological capabilities and primitive technology, humans have certain advantages that we've spent thousands of years developing. They moved to a demonstration area where human soldiers were testing weapons and tactics designed specifically for combat against technologically superior opponents. Zethkar watched as they practiced using primitive projectile weapons against simulated Dominion forces whose technological advantages had been negated. The results were disturbing. Without their enhanced capabilities and advanced equipment, Dominion troops fighting at baseline human levels were systematically outmatched by human forces. who had spent millennia perfecting warfare under those conditions. Your species has never had to fight without technological advantages, Dr. Chen observed. Ours has never been able to fight with them. When technology is eliminated as a factor, the species with more experience at primitive warfare tends to win. The demonstration concluded with scenarios that showed human forces using improvised weapons and tactics to defeat Dominion troops who had been reduced to baseline capabilities by biological and technological warfare. Even if these weapons work as designed, Zethkar said, they would require delivery systems capable of reaching Dominion targets across interstellar distances. Which brings us to our next demonstration, Morrison said, leading him toward what appeared to be the station's central launch facility. What Zethkar saw there challenged his understanding of what primitive species should be capable of achieving. Human engineers had constructed vessels that combined Dominion faster-than-light technology with human innovations, in ways that created capabilities that exceeded both technologies working independently. We call them deep strike platforms. Dr. Chen explained as they examined spacecraft that were obviously designed for missions involving penetration of heavily defended enemy territory. Each one can carry sufficient weaponry to neutralize strategic targets across multiple star systems. The platforms were enormous, larger than Dominion dreadnoughts, but designed according to principles that prioritize stealth and autonomy over direct combat capability. They're not warships in the conventional sense, Morrison continued. They're delivery systems for strategic weapons that can operate independently for decades while conducting operations across vast regions of space. Zethkar examined the technical specifications and realized that the humans had solved logistical problems that Dominion military engineers had considered theoretically impossible. These vessels could conduct operations in Dominion space while remaining undetected for years, he said. That's the plan, Dr. Chen confirmed. Each platform carries enough strategic weapons to eliminate critical targets across entire sectors. They also carry manufacturing systems that allow them to produce additional weapons using materials they can acquire through asteroid mining or raiding operations. The strategic implications were horrifying. The humans weren't just planning to attack Dominion targets. They were planning to establish permanent military presence deep in Dominion space, using platforms that could operate independently while systematically destroying Dominion strategic infrastructure. How many of these platforms do you have operational? Zethkar asked. The first one launches next week, Morrison replied.
Others will follow at regular intervals until we have sufficient coverage of all critical Dominion territories.
You're already beginning offensive operations. We're already preparing for the war that your people seem determined to fight, Dr. Chen corrected.
Commander, you need to understand something about human strategic thinking. We don't wait for enemies to attack us before we begin preparing our response. The moment your first fleet entered our system, we began developing ways to destroy your civilization. She led him to a final demonstration area where the most disturbing human innovation was displayed. The chamber contained what appeared to be a self-replicating manufacturing system that could produce unlimited numbers of weapons using nothing but raw materials and energy. We call it a von Neumann swarm, she explained. Each unit can produce copies of itself along with whatever weapons or equipment we need for specific operations. Deploy one unit in an asteroid field, and within a few years you have an automated fleet capable of conducting military operations across an entire star system. Zethkar stared at the innocuous-looking device that represented perhaps the most dangerous military innovation he had ever encountered, self-replicating weapons systems that could turn any source of raw materials into military assets. This technology is prohibited under every galactic warfare convention, he protested. Galactic warfare conventions written by species that never faced extinction, Morrison replied. Commander, we told you yesterday that humans are willing to do whatever it takes to survive. This is what whatever it takes looks like when implemented by a species that has spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war. The demonstration concluded with simulations showing von Neumann swarms spreading across Dominion space, converting asteroid belts and uninhabited planets into weapons production facilities that could supply resistance movements indefinitely. You're planning to turn our own resources against us, Zethkar said. We're planning to win, Dr. Chen replied. And we're planning to make sure that victory is permanent, that the Dominion never again poses a threat to human freedom or the freedom of any other species. As they returned to the conference room, Zethkar found himself processing military capabilities that exceeded anything in Dominion strategic planning. The humans had developed weapons and tactics that could neutralize every Dominion advantage, while exploiting weaknesses that Dominion military doctrine had never anticipated. Why are you showing me this? He asked, as they sat around the familiar conference table. Why reveal capabilities that could give you decisive advantages if kept secret? Admiral Morrison leaned back in his chair and studied Zethkar with the same clinical interest that Dr. Chen had shown throughout their discussions. Because, Commander, we want you to go back to your fleet and report exactly what you've seen here. We want the Dominion leadership to understand precisely what they're proposing to fight. You want us to know that resistance is futile, Zethkar said, though he realized as he spoke that the words felt wrong. We want you to know that victory is impossible, Dr. Cummington. Chen corrected. There's a difference. Resistance is never futile when the alternative is extinction. But victory, the kind of clean, efficient conquest that the Dominion has achieved against other species, that's what's impossible here. Morrison nodded. Commander, your people can still conquer Earth. You can probably eliminate most of human civilization. But you cannot achieve the kind of victory that allows you to integrate human territories into the Dominion and move on to the next conquest. What you can achieve is a war that will last for centuries and ultimately destroy both our civilizations. Dr. Chen added. That's the choice we're offering you. Not victory or defeat, but mutual annihilation or negotiated coexistence. The weight of that choice settled over Zethkar like a physical presence. Everything he had seen over the past 4 days had led to this moment. The realization that the Dominion faced an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. Tomorrow would be his final day with the humans, and somehow he suspected that what they showed him then would be even more disturbing than everything he had already learned. On the 5th and final day, Zethkar was escorted to a part of the station he had not seen before. The corridors were different here, older somehow, with an atmosphere that suggested they had been carved from something that existed long before the rest of the facility was built. Admiral Morrison and Dr. Berth, Chen walked beside him in uncharacteristic silence, their usual willingness to explain and demonstrate replaced by something that felt almost like reverence. Today we show you why, Morrison said simply as they approached a massive vault door that required authorization from both humans to open. The chamber beyond was enormous, stretching into darkness that the overhead lighting couldn't quite penetrate. But what dominated the space wasn't its size, it was the smell. Death. Ancient death that had soaked into the walls and floors and become part of the structure itself. This is the memorial chamber, Dr. Chen said softly. It contains physical artifacts from every major human conflict over the past 3,000 years. As Zethkar's eyes adjusted, he began to make out the contents of the vast space. Display cases stretched in every direction, containing weapons, uniforms, documents, and objects that told the story of human warfare across millennia of conflict. We brought you here, Morrison continued, because understanding human military capability isn't enough. To truly understand what you're facing, you need to understand why we fight the way we do. They began walking through the displays, and Zethkar found himself confronting the physical reality of human warfare in ways that all their previous demonstrations had failed to convey. These weren't training simulations or technological demonstrations. These were the actual tools and remnants of conflicts that had shaped human civilization. This section contains artifacts from what we call the ancient period, Dr. Chen explained as they passed displays containing bronze weapons, armor-beaten and scarred by combat, and pottery fragments that showed scenes of battle. Wars fought over territory, resources, and tribal identity. The weapons were primitive by galactic standards, but they showed innovations that spoke to minds focused entirely on the problem of killing other humans as efficiently as possible. Swords designed to penetrate specific types of armor. Spear points engineered to cause maximum damage. Shields crafted to deflect particular weapons while allowing counterattacks. Even at this early stage, Morrison observed, humans were thinking systematically about warfare. Not just fighting when attacked, but developing comprehensive theories about how to defeat other humans who were just as intelligent and innovative as they were. They moved into a section containing artifacts from what the humans called their classical period. Here, Zethkar saw evidence of military thinking that had evolved beyond simple tribal warfare into something approaching modern strategic planning. The Romans, Dr. Chen said, indicating a display containing armor, weapons, and tactical manuals that were over 2,000 years old. They conquered most of their known world using organizational principles and tactical innovations that we still study today. The Roman artifacts showed a level of systematic thinking about warfare that approached Dominion military doctrine. Standardized equipment designed for mass production, training manuals that codified combat techniques, engineering tools for building fortifications and siege equipment. But the Romans weren't the most sophisticated military thinkers of their era, Morrison added, leading them to another display. That distinction probably belongs to the Chinese. The Chinese artifacts were even more disturbing. military treatises that analyzed warfare as a complex system involving politics, economics, psychology, and logistics, weapons that demonstrated innovations centuries ahead of their time. Maps showing strategic thinking that operated on continental scales. Sun Tzu's Art of War, Dr. Chen said, indicating a manuscript that seemed to glow with age. Written over 2,500 years ago, it remains one of our most important texts on military strategy. She quoted from memory. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. The implications were clear. Humans had been thinking about deception, misdirection, and psychological warfare as fundamental aspects of military strategy for over 2 millennia. The Chinese understood something that most galactic civilizations never learn. Morrison continued. The goal of warfare isn't to defeat enemy armies. The goal is to achieve your political objectives while minimizing your own costs. Sometimes that means never fighting at all. They moved through sections containing artifacts from medieval warfare, Renaissance military innovations, and the gunpowder revolutions that transformed human combat. Each period showed technological advancement, but more importantly, each showed conceptual evolution in how humans thought about the problem of organized violence. The interesting pattern, Dr. Chen observed as they examined firearms that were centuries old but showed design principles that anticipated modern weapons, is that human military innovation has always been driven by the need to fight other humans. Every technological advancement, every tactical innovation, every strategic concept has been tested against opponents who were equally capable of innovation. The section containing artifacts from human industrial warfare was where Zethkar began to truly understand the depths of human military thinking. These weren't primitive conflicts fought with simple weapons. These were campaigns involving millions of soldiers, weapons of unprecedented destructive power, and strategic thinking that operated on global scales. World War I, Morrison said, indicating displays containing gas masks, artillery shells, and photographs that showed landscapes transformed into hellish wastelands by industrial-scale combat. The first time humans applied modern manufacturing techniques to the problem of warfare. The artifacts told stories of battles involving millions of casualties, weapons that could kill thousands with a single shell, and tactics that assumed acceptable losses on scales that would have broken most galactic civilizations. 4 years of continuous combat, Dr. Chen continued. Approximately 20 million military casualties and 20 million civilian deaths. Economic costs that bankrupted empires and reshaped global civilization. And you kept fighting, Zethkar observed. We kept fighting, she confirmed. Because the alternative was accepting defeat, and humans have never been very good at accepting defeat when fundamental principles are at stake. The World War II section was even more disturbing. The artifacts here spoke of warfare that had transcended military conflict and become a struggle for the survival of entire civilizations. Total war, Morrison explained as they examined weapons designed to destroy cities, documents showing plans for industrial mobilization that involved entire populations, and photographs of urban areas reduced to rubble, the point where warfare becomes indistinguishable from organized genocide. Zethkar studied photographs showing human cities destroyed by weapons that approached nuclear levels of destruction. Strategic bombing campaigns designed to break enemy morale by targeting civilian populations. Industrial facilities retooled to produce weapons at scales that defied comprehension. 60 to 80 million deaths, Dr. Fa, Chen said quietly. Entire nations mobilized for warfare. Civilian populations deliberately targeted as strategic objectives. And at the end, weapons that could destroy cities in single attacks. She led him to a display case containing fragments of what appeared to be melted stone and twisted metal. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, she said. The first use of nuclear weapons in warfare. We developed the ability to destroy cities in minutes, and we used it to end a war that might otherwise have continued for years. You used weapons of mass destruction against your own species, Zethkar said. We used whatever weapons were necessary to achieve victory, Morrison replied. And then we spent the next 80 years developing more powerful weapons while learning how to fight wars without using them. The Cold War section contained artifacts that demonstrated human strategic thinking at levels that approached theoretical perfection. Weapons capable of destroying entire continents, communication systems designed to survive nuclear attacks, plans for conducting warfare in environments where normal civilization had ceased to exist. Mutual assured destruction. Chen explained, showing him documents describing strategies based on the certainty that any major conflict would result in the elimination of both sides. We learned how to make warfare so destructive that it became self-deterrent. But we also learned how to fight wars indirectly, Morrison added, indicating displays containing artifacts from conflicts that had been fought through proxies, economic warfare, and technological competition. How to achieve strategic objectives without direct military confrontation. The final section contained artifacts from humanity's most recent conflicts, and here Zethkar saw military thinking that had evolved beyond anything the Dominion had encountered in previous conquests. Asymmetric warfare, Dr. Chen said, showing him weapons and equipment designed for conflicts between opponents with vastly different capabilities. How to fight enemies who have overwhelming technological and numerical advantages. The artifacts told stories of small human forces defeating much larger opponents through superior intelligence, better understanding of local conditions, and willingness to accept casualties that conventional armies would consider unacceptable. Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, Morrison listed. Conflicts where technologically superior forces with overwhelming firepower were defeated by opponents who understood the terrain, had stronger motivation, and were willing to fight longer than their enemies were willing to occupy. These are the lessons we've applied to our current situation, Dr. Chen continued. How to fight enemies who are stronger, better equipped, and more numerous than you are. How to turn their advantages against them.